Hi everyone. Today I'm doing a slightly different type of video with me showing on camera, and there's my drawing of Maximus over there on the wall. I wanted to talk about drawing portraits, and I wanted to give you some tips on how you can improve the overall appearance of your portraits. I'm not going to be talking about specific things like drawing proportions or specific parts of the face or shading. Instead, I'm going to be talking about certain modifications that you can make in order to improve the overall quality and appearance of your artwork. These are not strict rules. I deviate from them occasionally myself when I see fit, but I do hope that you'll find some of it useful. Alright, let's start. First we're going to look at this portrait of John Wayne, and as you can see, the lower part of the portrait, where his chest is sort of fading into the white of the paper, so I didn't draw all the way to the edge. I think this is very useful if you want to make a more balanced portrait that seems like it's popping out of the paper, because sometimes if you draw all the way to one edge, then you have a problem because you have a white area here, here and here, and you've drawn all the way to this edge here. So it can somehow look a little bit unbalanced. If you look at this portrait here, this is my drawing of Morgan Freeman, which was done with a graphite pencil several years ago. Here I drew all the way to the edge. But like I said, here I had this problem because this area here is empty. And yes, he is covering more of the paper, but still it looks somewhat unbalanced. To compensate for that, I did a little bit of shading on the background, but I do think that's unnecessary in this case, and that if you are doing portraits, if you are drawing commissioned portraits, or if you're drawing just for fun, don't feel bad about leaving white areas. You can make a very effective and very nice looking portrait just by leaving all of this background white. Too many people seem to feel like they have to fill the background with something, and then they go on to draw complex backgrounds or shade them, which can have several negative effects. First, it can be distracting because there's no need for it. Second, it can actually prevent your portrait from popping out of the paper, because you're adding value, and your portrait is sort of sinking into that darker background and becoming less conspicuous. When you have a perfectly white background like this, you can make a very effective portrait that's popping out of the paper. Now, the reason why I also chose to talk about this drawing first was that sometimes, because of the issues of balance and composition, sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Like, for example, in my reference photo here, John Wayne was holding a rifle, which would have been a very nice detail to have on my drawing, but I also wanted to focus on his face and his expression. This is what I really wanted to capture, and this was my priority. So if I had drawn the rifle and everything, this would have been smaller and it would have been less balanced. I maybe would have had to draw all the way to the edge of the paper, and I didn't really want that. So I decided to simplify things a little bit. I left the rifle out and I focused on the face. If in some other case or some other occasion my focus was on his rifle or revolver or whatever, I would have drawn that, but here this was mostly about drawing his portrait and capturing his expression. So once again, I'm not saying that you should never do that, but generally I try to avoid drawing all the way to the edge of the drawing. It's a rule that you can break sometimes, but normally don't be afraid of leaving the background completely blank, because you can achieve a very nice balanced portrait with your character popping out of the paper. Now, a few more words about darker background. Sometimes drawing a darker background or adding some value to the background can be justified by achieving some contrast between the background and whatever it is that you're drawing. As you can see in this drawing of Del Boy here, his hat has some very light areas and his fur as well. So in order to make that pop out, in order to create that contrast, I shaded the background a little bit. This is one way of doing it, and it can be effective, but it's not the only way of doing it. Sometimes if you want to avoid all of that shading, you can do it slightly differently. I'm going to be showing you my drawing of Heath Ledger, and the reason this is interesting is because there are some very light, almost white areas on his armor, and his hair, as you know, is fairly light. He is blonde, or at least he is blonde in that movie. So what I wanted to show you here is that in order to draw blonde hair, or in order to draw lighter portions of your portrait, you don't necessarily have to draw a dark background. If you feel that a dark background would be too distracting or would eat up your character, in order to make it look, to make it pop out of the paper more, you can just draw the lighter hair or blonde hair with harder graphite pencils, or using less value and using more values in other portions of your drawing, like here and here and here, and of course the face. You can really make this look blonde, even though in comparison to the paper it's a lot darker. So even blonde hair is darker than the completely white of the background. And sometimes you can also move highlights a little bit to retain that edge. That's not a problem too. Another drawing of a blonde person is this drawing of Teresa Palmer, the actress, and you can see she also has blonde hair, and you can see how much darker her hair is in comparison to the background. So you don't necessarily have to draw darker background to draw blonde hair and darker areas. This drawing is also interesting because it gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about texture and detail and focus. If you look at her shoulders, like I said here again, the lower part of the portrait is fading. It's becoming lighter in value and fading into the whiteness of the paper. And if you look at the shoulder, it looks a little off focus. And if you look at the face and the hair, you can see that it's really sharp and detailed. This is a very nice effect that you can easily achieve in order to attract the focus of the eye on the face itself. What you do is you simply use more contrast, and you use cleaner edges to value, and you use more texture in these, or rougher texture in these areas which you're supposed to focus on, and you use less contrast, fewer edges in the areas that need to be sort of off focus. And why not show a colored pencil drawing as well? This is my drawing of the athlete Ivana Španović, and as you can see, I merely suggested the shape of shoulders here, and I drew just a tiny bit of her gear. I mostly focused on her face and hair. The thing here is that she was wearing some medals, and she had some stuff written on her jacket and some detail on her gear, so I decided to leave that out. Don't feel bad about doing that. When you can't really make out what's written, or you can't make out all of the details, it's okay to simplify. It's okay to simplify and just leave certain things out and focus on the things that you feel are more important. And finally, I wanted to talk about the eyes, which are of course one of the most important parts of your drawing. You can see that a lot of portraits have these reflections in the eyes, and this is a really nice touch which can make the eye look a lot more realistic. In order to achieve that contrast, you need to shade the eye properly. But that's not the only thing that I wanted to talk about. I also want to talk about two things. First, the position of that reflection, also the position of the eyes as well. Now, as for the position of the eyes, one of the advantages of drawings and portraits is that you can have a person looking at you at all times, depending on, regardless of the angle you're looking at the drawing from. So you can make the eyes of the person being drawn so that they are always looking at you. In this portrait, of course, I made the actor, this is the actor Voja look to the side. That really depends on you, but if you're drawing some portraits like family portraits or portraits of couple, and you really want them to be looking, looking at the person who's looking at the portrait, or looking straight, you can just move the eyes slightly. If you're uncomfortable with that, then it's fine. Don't make those modifications if you're afraid that you're going to make them look cross-eyed or anything, but most of the time you don't really have to move them that much. But when it comes to this reflection, this can actually be a good idea to move it a little bit to the side, because on a lot of the photos where there is a flash or something like that, or some kind of a reflection, it can be, you can see the reflection all over the pupil, and the pupil is the darkest part of the eye, and it can be nice to have this contrast between the pupil and the iris or the rest of the eye. So in order to retain that darker area and in order to retain that nice contrast, you can just move that reflection a little bit to the side, or maybe change its shape a little bit and make it a little bit smaller, and then you can have the pupil visible. Sometimes if you're moving the reflection to the side, you can also maybe even move the lighting to the whole face and the whole portrait a little bit to the side, and you can move these highlights a little bit to the side. But if you're uncomfortable with that, you don't even have to do that. You just move the reflection to the side a little bit and make it a little bit smaller, and I think you'll have a better looking eye. Well, that was the video. I hope you liked it and that you found some of it useful. You should also check out my other videos and subscribe, because I will be uploading a lot more content. Thank you for watching.